Welcome, everybody. Thanks for spending your Saturday afternoon with us. Really appreciate that. This is going to be our Order from Chaos class, or our CERT Leadership and Command Post training. My name is Mark Dolan. I'm the WPV-CERT Committee Chair, and I'll be presenting the first half of this presentation. And then Cam McCowan, who's our WPV-CERT Training Curriculum Development Manager, is going to present the second half, Medical Operations. And if we have anybody joining us today that's not familiar with WPV-CERT, we are the CERT program that covers the Woodside Fire Protection District. So that's areas of Woodside, Portola Valley, and the unincorporated parts of San Mateo County, such as Emerald Hills, Ladera, Los Trancos, Skyline, and Vista Verde. So our agenda for this afternoon, we're going to talk about our WPV-CERT branches and mobilization, setting up staging and check-ins. We'll go into a pretty deep review of the incident command system and the positions that you'll likely see in a command post. We'll talk about documentation, managing spontaneous volunteers, and medical group operations and setup. So by the end of this course, we hope that you'll be able to describe how to set up a command post and staging area, describe a lot of the ICS functional details and general staff positions, documentation requirements, and how to use spontaneous volunteers and how to set up the medical triage and treatment areas. Just a quick note, we will stop a couple times for questions. So if you can go ahead and post any questions you have, feel free to do that in the Q&A. You can also raise your hand when we get to the question and answer periods, and we'll answer as many questions as we can. So feel free to use the chat or the Q&A section. And this is a webinar, so it's a little different in that you don't see the all the attendees, you're just going to see the panelists. When it comes time for the Q&A portion, if you raise your hand, we'll go ahead and unmute you so that you can ask your question verbally. Now, I hope that everybody's already done this, but if you haven't, please make sure that you take the independent study courses, IS 100, which is Introduction to Incident Command System, and IS 700, Introduction to National Incident Management System. You do need to take both of these, IS 100 and 700, if you want to meet the requirements to be a CERT member of our program. And additionally, to receive full credit for this course, you will need to participate in an in-person tabletop exercise, and we'll schedule this as soon as we can in the future, given the current situation with the pandemic. But this is a two-part class. It's this lecture portion of the class, and then an actual in-person exercise where you get to practice this material. So we will certainly let everybody know when that's on the schedule. A lot of the material that we're going to cover today is what they call a perishable skill if you don't use it on a regular basis. We talk a lot about different position descriptions and what their specific job duties are. And if you don't do this on a regular basis, you're not going to remember all these details. And so what's important to know is that the field operating guide or field operations guide that we give out to our CERT members is a great resource for you. A lot of this is in this guide. So again, even if you don't remember the specifics of everything we cover here today, at least you should remember that you can refer to your FOG for a refresher. Now this material applies specifically to our program, WPV-CERT. We have 3 branches. Those branches are Woodside, Portola Valley, and the Skyline area. And each one of these branches is going to operate in a major disaster its own staging area and command post. So when activated, CERT members are going to report either to the location that is requested or in a major earthquake to their nearest staging area. One of the key components to ICS is that there's predefined incident facilities and locations. So when we use the term incident command post or command post, that's a standard term for the location where the primary functions of incident command are performed. And this is where the incident commander, or what we also call the team leader in the CERT world, will always stay at the command post. The staging area is a temporary location where resources such as personnel, supplies, and equipment gather, they stage there, and then they wait their operational assignments. Why staging is so important is that as resources come in and become available, they need to be allocated to the location where they're most useful. And we want to make sure that everybody that's part of this group coming together is properly checked in, their skills and training and credentials are verified, they're assigned to a team that is appropriate for those skills, and then those teams go and get dispatched out to do whatever tasks they've been assigned. The staging area is a key component to this because as these resources come together, let's say in the first 30 minutes after a major earthquake, you might have one person, 5 people, 10 people, and then suddenly 15, 20 people start to show up. You need to stage those resources, get them checked in, and get the command post staff starting to work on establishing teams and building the organization as a whole. So how do we mobilize? Well, in a major incident like a major earthquake, you're going to first proceed to the nearest branch staging location. You're going to bring your CERT backpack, and on the way you're going to make damage assessments that would be helpful for the command post or incident commander team leader's decision-making process. And there is a form for this, but just a blank piece of paper is probably going to work just fine. But the idea here is as you make your way down to the staging location, if you observe something, if you observe a road is blocked, or there's people that have medical emergencies, whatever it is, you're going to write down as you head to the staging location, you're going to write down this information so that when you show up there, you can hand that damage assessment to the incident commander, and that will help him or her to start prioritizing what needs to happen. So as you know, the first CERT member to show up at the staging location is the initial incident commander or team leader. And then that role may change to somebody that either has a pre-designated role as the incident commander or somebody that has additional skills or training, or in our program, that could be somebody that's on the incident management team. So within WPV-CERT, incident management team members are the most trained and are the people that will be handling most of the command post staffing. So just remember, if you're the first person there, you are the incident commander until that role changes. And one of the first things that you need to do is to start establishing check-in for arriving CERT members. So first and foremost, get out a piece of paper and a pen and make sure everybody coming to the staging location starts to sign in, because we need to maintain accountability of all of our CERT members. It's very important that everybody checks in and that they check out. And then another key decision you're going to make as the initial incident commander is where to locate your command post. Now, the staging area may become the command post, or it might make more sense to have the command post be a little distance away so that people, as they come into staging, aren't disrupting the activities that are occurring in the command post, but they should be relatively close together so that you can communicate easily between the two using either runners or radios. So as our command post starts to build its team, we have to really think about some of the core principles of on-scene management. And if you're the incident commander or you're part of the command post team, well, you're part of this management group, and you need to always remember the kind of key principles here about what we're trying to do. First and foremost, we are maintaining safety of our workers. So it's the team leaders and any other leadership role within the CERT organization has to always be prioritizing our activities based on our capabilities and our training. Is it safe for us to do this? In addition, we have to provide clear leadership and an organizational structure. We have to develop a chain of command and roles that are known by all of our volunteers. So if I'm on the search and rescue team, I know I have a search and rescue team leader, and that search and rescue team leader knows that he or she reports to the operations section chief, and the operations section chief knows that they report to the incident commander, etc. So we have very clear chain of command. And we want to improve the overall effectiveness of our efforts, and we do this by collecting and prioritizing information, and it all has to be based on rescuer safety and doing the greatest good for the greatest number, which is of course our CERT motto. So these are key tenets, principles of on-scene management that anybody that's going to be in the command post always needs to keep paramount within their mind. So objectives of on-scene management. Well, in a disaster situation, we need to focus on some key objectives. Scope of the incident. What is the problem? Determine a strategy. What can we do and how will we do that? We deploy teams and resources. So who's going to do what? And we need to document our actions and our results. Let's talk about how we prioritize our actions and some predefined priority levels. First and foremost, we always protect the safety of the rescuers. So we, as CERT team members, always prioritize our safety because we don't want to become victims or part of the problem. So first and foremost, we always prioritize our safety. Second, we prioritize life safety in general. And then third, property and environment. There are some standard priority levels that you'll see on some of the forms that we use, flash being the most important priority, then high, medium, and low. And it is possible that you'll have an incident that might be a low or medium priority, such as a road blockage, but that could become a flash priority incident, such as if it was blocking the ability for people to evacuate. So priorities can change. In general, use this as a tool to help you keep track of overall priority levels and just be aware that they can change. And you are always sizing up these situations, and therefore those priority levels can and will probably change over time. Now there is a 9-step process for sizing up incidents. I'm not going to go into those specific 9 steps. They are in the participant manual. We talk a lot about it in the basic training, but in general, we always need to size up an incident. And in short, what that means is, can we handle this incident safely within our training and our available resources? If the answer to that is yes, then we need to prioritize. Is this incident higher or lower priority than other incidents that we're working with at the time? We need to develop an action plan. We need to dispatch our teams and resources. We need to document and continually evaluate our progress. So within the scope of what a command post is working on currently, a list of priorities, there's going to be a competing list of incidents. Some of course are higher priorities than others, but every incident that comes into the command post, we need to do this size up and scope it if it's in or out of scope of what we can handle. Because if something comes into the command post like a house fire, well, that's going to be out of scope for what we can do as a CERT team. We certainly aren't going to go put out a house fire, but we can notify 911, the town emergency operations centers, or area EOC. We can document it, and we can consider safe mitigating efforts such as notifying neighbors, blocking off areas, etc. So every incident that comes into the command post, part of the activity happening there is a continual decision-making process of sizing up the incident and if it's in or out of scope. So if the answer is yes, we can take action. If the answer is no, we need to get that message to the people that can take action, so essentially 911 or or dispatch. And then we can take a look at the secondary or potential mitigating efforts that we as a CERT team can do as part of that incident. We're going to do a quick review of the Incident Command System basic principles. We're going to be covering a lot of the specifics of the different position descriptions within the Incident Command System and how those apply to CERT. But in general, it's important to realize that there are some key principles here. And briefly, we use common terminology. So we don't use jargon or 10 codes. We speak plain language so everybody knows what we're talking about. We have integrated communications, which means that we have a common communications plan. So everybody knows what radios or what radio channels, how do we communicate amongst the different parties. We have unity of command, which means that everybody reports to only one supervisor. So you don't take direction from more than one person. You only have one supervisor. So you know who you report to. And we need to maintain a manageable span of control. And that means that supervisors need to be able to adequately manage their subordinates. And this is typically in the 3 to 7 subordinate range. If you get higher than that, then you can't effectively supervise and maintain accountability of those subordinates. And accountability is a key part of all of this. We need to maintain check-in and check-out procedures. We need to track our resources, where they are, what they're doing, and we need to maintain adequate documentation so we have accountability of our actions. And then finally, modular organization, and that just means that the organization grows or contracts as needed, and the Incident Command System organizational model helps us do that. Okay, here's a basic organizational chart using the Incident Command System. At the top, we have our government agency liaison, so that would be our fire district or Salina as our agency liaison. Could be a different liaison if our CERT team is working for somebody else. If we were mobilized to go help some other jurisdiction, then that could be a different agency. But ultimately, all CERT teams do report to some government agency liaison. Below that, we have our team leader. This is also often called the incident commander, and I'll talk more about the difference between why it's called a team leader versus an incident commander. But in essence, whatever the term is, within the CERT organization, this is the person who is ultimately responsible for the team. And they're responsible for all the positions until they delegate those positions. So if you're a CERT team of 3 people, then there's still always going to be a team leader. But in a large organization, that team leader may be responsible for, 15, 20, 50 people, and they're going to build up that organization so that it can be effectively managed. So in this diagram, we have our team leader, and then underneath we have different general staff positions, such as our operations section chief, planning chief, logistics section chief, etc. And we'll go into each one of these in detail. So the team leader or incident commander, you'll notice that the terminology used to be in the CERT program, it would mention TL/IC. In the recent curriculum update that occurred last year, they changed it to be just essentially team leader. I think there was some confusion because when a CERT team is part of a larger incident command system organization, then there would be an incident commander managing that larger system or organization. And in this case, the CERT team leader is a more appropriate term than the CERT incident commander because the incident commander is managing the larger organization as a whole. But we can still use the term incident commander because there are times that we will be operating independently. So in a major earthquake, there's a good chance that our 3 CERT branches will each be operating independently, and therefore they're setting up their own incident command system in that branch, and therefore the use of the term incident commander is appropriate in that case. Now, if we were asked to, let's say, for example, go help with sandbagging, and 10 people showed up, and we were at the request of the town or the fire district or whoever, well, then most likely in that case, the CERT team leader is a more appropriate term because there is already an incident commander who's managing that incident. So the team leader or incident commander or IC is responsible for the safety of this incident. They're establishing objectives and they're delegating authority to others, so they're building up their organization as needed. They're collaborating with other parties, so they're gathering information, and they're maintaining a liaison with other responders such as fire, law enforcement, other CERT programs, etc. And they are taking direction from agency officials or whoever it is that they're currently working for or under. Now, underneath the incident commander or team leader, we have an operations section chief. And the operations section chief's job is to carry out the tactical operations. So what this effectively means is that they're the ones that are establishing and dispatching and keeping track of the teams that are out there in the field doing things. They're the people doing light search and rescue, etc. So they're directing and managing all these resources. So what might this include? Well, it could include damage assessment teams, light search and rescue, fire suppression, medical treatment and transport teams, road clearing, shelter operations. You know, any of the activity is managed by the operations section chief. And as we'll see here in the next slide, the operations section can grow to be quite large because it is one of the larger parts of the organization as a whole. It's the doers. They're the ones out there getting things done. So this is a very important role, and it's important to realize that teams can be specialized or general purpose. So you can have a team that is just the medical transport team, and that's all they're doing. They're running around transporting patients. Or you could have general purpose teams that maybe their job is to go do damage assessment, and if they come upon something like a small fire, then they become a fire suppression team. So there's many ways of setting up the organization. It's all going to just depend on what your objectives are for this particular set of incidents. Here's an example of an expanding operations section. So this would be an example of if we have a large number of CERT team members and we have lots of tasks that we need to get done, well, then the operations section is going to start to grow and expand. And in this case, this operations section chief has established 3 different group leaders, one for fire suppression, one for search and rescue, and one for medical. And then those leaders can then further build out their teams. Now, remembering the whole concept of span of control, and we want to keep the number of subordinates that we manage in the 3 to 7 range. You can see here that the operations section chief is directly managing 3 people. So that's an acceptable number of people within the span of control objectives. And then further, the group leaders are each managing 3 teams. So again, that's a good number. So just remember, as you build that organization, you want to ideally not be having to supervise more than 7 people. And in a realistic situation where we have a large number of CERT members, like after a major earthquake, if we have 15, 20, 30 people show up, then it's very important that we start to organize in a way that's very clear, and we can utilize all of our resources and still maintain span of control and accountability. Okay, so planning section chief. Well, this person's job is to develop an action plan to help accomplish objectives. And to be honest, that action plan can be as simple as we need to make an action plan, or we need to set up the staging area, or we need to start building the team. Whatever that action plan is, we just need to be thinking about what is the objective and what's the plan to meet those objectives. They're also thinking about overall situation status. They're kind of the thinkers, they're the planning section chief. They're the thinkers, they're planning. So what's happening, what's damaged, who's injured, what's the list of incidents, what is the status of our resources, do we have available resources, is everybody committed? And the other thing they're thinking about is long-term. So they're thinking about, well, is the weather bad? Is it going to start raining in the next couple hours? do we have threats coming our way that we need to plan on? So they're the larger scale, longer term planning and thinking component. Okay, and last we're going to talk about logistics section chief. This person's job is to support the incident needs with things like communications, transportation, shelter, food, and water for the response teams itself, so the CERT team members, all the tools and equipment, medical facilities, supplies, and also personnel in general. So if we need additional personnel, then logistics job would be to requisition or seek out those additional personnel resources. Now there is one other section, general section that we're not going to mention, and that's the administration section, because we don't really have much use for that in the CERT world. The administration section chief would be responsible for things like contract management and paying bills, things like that. So we just don't have a need for that. So we don't use that within the CERT world. Okay, so I know that was a lot. So I'm hoping that we can take a quick pause, and if anybody has any questions so far, what we're going to do is actually apply this to an actual situation. So there'll be some examples. So I'll pause. If anybody has any questions, please raise your hand or put it in the chat. Okay, Robert, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
All right, good afternoon. Thanks for doing this. Most interesting as usual. I have a question about the selection of our staging area. One of the things about a staging area is, its safety and accessibility. I know our staging area is right on top of the San Andreas Fault. I know we have new buildings there, but isn't that still going to be likely a maximally impacted area compared to other areas, for example, in Portola Valley? Ford Field or something like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, the buildings are very new there, and it's a great place to co-locate because of the fact that it's close to the town EOC, and that there are facilities there that are readily available. One of the things that we are going to be doing is formalizing secondary or backup sites. And so one of the reasons that we have our CERT radio network is that if one of our main staging locations was damaged, then we would be able to communicate that to the team through the radio. So we could say, Portola Valley branch staging is now located at wherever.
Yeah, very good. And does staging also take into account proximity, for example, and access to Stanford Hospital, for example? Because in Portola Valley, we only have like 3 exits.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So that's something that Cam is going to cover in medical operations, because the most important thing is that the medical operations is located close to transportation. So Cam will cover that, but you're right. We have limited access, and absolutely. So that's a good question. Cam will cover a little bit more about that in MedOps. But those are great questions, Robert.
I'd like to just add that all of Portola Valley is just a few hundred feet from the main fault, from the San Andreas Fault. So it's kind of hard to plan a place that would be immune from earthquake activity. You try, but there's no telling.
Okay, William, you can go ahead and unmute.
Thank you. Do you recommend the CERT staging area to be close by but not at the same location as a common congregational area for people that are displaced during the disaster event?
So my recommendation is it's not going to be too close. You want to clearly delineate that it's CERT staging. So you wouldn't want a whole bunch of people mulling around there asking questions.
That was my point, is you want those separated, but still, right, you're answering affirmative to my questions. Yeah, you want those separated. Great.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you.
Mark, in the Q&A, we have a question here. Which section is responsible for signing volunteers in and out?
That's a great question. So for our purposes, we're going to say that that's planning's job. And the reason that we're going to say that is because planning is responsible for tracking resource status and availability, but logistics job is also to requisition resources. So it can be very easy to say, well, why wouldn't logistics be doing that? So my answer to this is we're going to say that it's a planning role because you are more likely to have a planning section chief established before a logistics section, because in a initial incident, because we want to check people in right away and we need to start planning. So having a planning section chief established before a logistics chief makes more sense. And so therefore, because we need to get people checked in, that's a key thing. We're going to put that under planning's role. So if you have if people are starting to flow into the staging location, the first couple of people are just going to put out a sign-in sheet. But then as things get, as the team gets built and more established, you're going to assign a planning section chief who will probably then establish a staging manager. And the staging manager's job would be to be physically located in the staging location, making sure people are checking in. And then they're going to be updating the planning section chief about the resources that are in staging. Okay, Julie, go ahead.
Hello.
Hi,
yes.
Julie.
Hi. Quick question though. So I understand that you say that there's a designated area for the CERT volunteers versus anybody who is an evacuee or anybody who's uninjured or whatever, just runs up there, right? Since I'm up Skyline. So my question is that, is there any way to have some kind of signage or anything that says, hey, similar to when we did, in your corporation, you go, hey, go to A, if you're just need to evacuate, please go this location. That way it directs them that way, away from like the market, and make them go to like Mountain Terrace or something like that.
So if I'm getting your question correctly, we want to make sure that CERT staging is separate because we don't want to commingle with people that are just trying to congregate.
I was just wondering, do we have signage or awareness and pamphlets or anything to inform anybody else who happens to be up here? If there's an emergency, please go to this location, instead of them all rushing because they see us over there at the CERT. We say, if there ever happens to be some kind of a concern or whatever, please go over, let's say, Mountain Terrace. Don't go over to Market area,
Sure. Well, it's important to realize that SMC alert messages will be sent out through the sheriff or fire department if they're able to do so. I see what you're saying about in a kind of a large scale incident, people could be misdirected if people are thinking that CERT staging is where they should go. But I don't have a greater answer for that. There's no like predefined signage that people put up to say, head in this location for non-CERT members. So, CERT members know where to go for staging, and that would be a good thing we could discuss about how do we better inform the community of places that they can go in an emergency. As of right now, that would predominantly be the job of the towns and the sheriff's department and the fire department to send those messages either via SMC alert or other channels.
Okay.
It's not a bad idea for the general public to show up in the CERT area. They'll get checked. They'll have a medical checkup real quick, and then they'll be sent someplace where it's more suitable.
So Patrick is asking a question about expectations of the interaction between CERT teams and the fire department response. So in a large-scale earthquake scenario, our CERT team is operating independently and is passing incident status information either through the town emergency operations centers or through directly to county dispatch. So we are not directly interacting with the fire department. Now that can change. So if there was a request for us to assist on a particular incident, then that message could be passed through, and then our command post would assign resources to assist the fire department directly. So I think that's a difference between our program and a lot of other CERT programs. A lot of other CERT programs work essentially directly under and part of the fire department and at the direction of the fire department. Because of of the way that our towns are set up and the way that we expect a large-scale incident to occur, our fire department only has 14 or 15 people on duty in a given time, and so they're going to be overwhelmed. And so our CERT program is set up to essentially operate independently and do as much good as we can for the community. And then as the incident evolves, then it's likely that we could be deployed to assist the fire department in a more direct way. It all depends on how things occur in the incident.
Mark, in the Q&A, Carol Monet has posted a good one. Is the CERT size up and the CERT team size up the same? It's a different look than the 9 points we usually see. We kind of glossed over this in today's presentation, but it's the same general principle. You look around, you don't stop the size up process. You're trying to figure out what the conditions are to have an idea of what the situation is, an awareness of the situation. In fact, we call it situational awareness. And based on what the current conditions are and keeping your attention focused not only on the task ahead of you, but on things that might be changing in the environment, then modifying your plans, but making plans and then executing those plans. And so it's a continuous process that goes on, and it's pretty much the same for the team as it is for the individuals, except that you're trying to coordinate now an organization, whether it's just your team or whether it's 20 teams working under you and you're the operations chief. It's pretty much the same process.
Yeah, and Carol, if I'm getting your question correctly, I think what I would add to that is that if you're on a search and rescue team and you come across a building that you're going to do a search, well, you're going to do that size up, that 9-point size up, and you're going to continue to do that. If you're in the command post and you're an operations section chief or an incident commander or an ops section chief, the term size up in that sense is you are continually looking at all the incidents because, of course, the command post is dealing with multiple incidents. So you as a team might be out doing search and rescue for one incident, but we might have 5 or 6 or 10 others. And so the size up in the command post has to do with the priorities of all of the incidents. And so, and of course, we're doing the same thing. We're thinking about all the safety factors and is this an in-scope or out-of-scope event? Is this something we can dispatch a team to be helpful on, or is this something that is outside of our scope and we need to pass it up the chain? So that's when I mentioned size up in this context, I'm referring to it more as part of the command post decision-making process. William Keith has a question. What is a protocol to protect the teams and command post resources during a secondary civil unrest event? I'm going to say that's CERT teams are not security teams. So in that case, we would be relying upon the sheriff's office or professional police responders to assist us. We're not in a security or police role in any way. How many CERT staging areas are linked to one incident command post? It could be multiple, but we're going to generally assume it's a one-to-one relationship. Now, in our model, we have three different branches and 3 different branch staging locations. It's very possible that, let's say up on Skyline, maybe a command post is not set up, but there are people staged there. And as long as we have communications, we could say, well, okay, you've got 10 people up in staging on Skyline. Well, we need them down to Woodside. So if you can get them down to Woodside, great, or let's deploy them somewhere else. So yeah, it can be a one-to-many relationship, but in general, it's going to be a one-to-one initially. Great. Okay, those are some really good questions.
There are a few more questions in the Q&A.
Great. Let's take a look at those. Val, I see your question, and I'll answer that offline. That's a great one. Yeah, Zonehaven, exactly. Donnie, the fog, there's a link to the fog. I'll send it out in an email as well so you can look at it. Debbie Hudson mentioned Zonehaven will direct people on SMC alert as to where to go. So yeah, so Zonehaven SMC alert is critical to be signed up for. This is how our county pushes out messaging. A lot of this higher level, county level messaging is all going to be handled at the sheriff, fire district, and town levels who push out those messages. Those aren't going to be coming from CERT team members. Donnie asks, how do we get access to the FOG, the Field Operating Guide? There's an online version of that available. There's a link that we'll send out. You can download it. There's also the physical copy that we've handed out at our CERT classes. And you can also, if you want a copy, you don't have one, let us know. We have copies that we can give you. Lynn asks how many people are part of our organization. We've trained over 250 CERT volunteers so far. We have several dozen that are actively involved in developing the program. Okay, so let's go ahead and keep going here. I think we're doing pretty good on time. So next up, we're going to talk a little bit how this would work in a large-scale earthquake, so that you can see it in more of a real-time or realistic scenario. All right, so we've talked a lot about different positions within the incident command system and what their roles are. But big picture, what good is this to me? So if you're in charge, you need to be able to delegate functions to other people or you will be overwhelmed. Let's say you have 10 people that show up in your staging location. You need to be able to organize them in the most effective way. And let's say you had 50 people show up in your staging location. That's obviously a large number of people that need to be organized, and this is the whole purpose behind ICS, is to give us a structure that allows us to do that and everybody understands their roles and responsibilities. And it's very important to be looking at the overall situation and not focusing on specific circumstances. As the incident commander, your job is big picture. All right, let's bring this all together and actually take a look at a real scenario, how this could actually play out. So let's say that we have a major earthquake. It's Saturday at noontime, and we have lots of neighbors that are home. Most of them are now starting to come out of their homes and they're on the streets. You can see smoke and fire visible. And you check on your family, everybody's okay, and your immediate neighbors are okay. You grab your CERT backpack and equipment, and you make your way to the CERT staging area. And you happen to find it yourself to be the first to arrive. So you are the incident commander. Additional CERT members are starting to arrive, and they're reporting major damage, injuries, trapped persons, leaking gas, fire, and more. So what are your initial objectives? We want to identify situations that threaten life and are rapidly developing. We want to check in all of our arriving CERT members so we maintain accountability. We want to start forming teams to work on these high priority situations. We're going to set up a medical triage and treatment area. And we're going to start establishing radio communications with the county and with the towns as their emergency operations centers come online. And we're going to be reporting flash and high priority incidents, either to 911 if we can reach them that way, or through the town EOCs and county area EOCs via radio. We're going to be continuing to collect and prioritize situation status. We're going to be doing damage assessment to see what the condition is of our neighborhoods. We're going to perform our fire suppression, first aid, light search and rescue, and utility shutoffs as resources allow. And we're going to be collecting information about our regional situation status from news media sources so we can get a bigger picture of what's happening. So that's a lot of stuff to do, right? So it's very clear that we're going to need to start delegating some of these functions. So if we have people available, and let's say we've got 15 people that have shown up at staging, well, let's go ahead and get these section chiefs set up. So we're going to establish an operations, planning, and logistics sections. So the operations sections chief will be dispatching teams to deal with the high priority incidents, situations. That includes the fire suppression, first aid, search and rescue, and other teams. Remember, these can be specific teams or general purpose teams, just a matter of how you want to structure it. And you're probably going to be setting up a medical triage and treatment area. Now, the planning section chief's duties are going to be to make sure that we're checking in all of those certs and that we're collecting damage reports from them and any injury reports that they may be able to provide as they come in. We're going to be looking at people's availabilities and skill sets, what personnel resources we have, and they're going to be directing people to the first aid medical treatment areas as needed if they're injured. They're going to be continuing to collect and prioritize situation status, and they're going to be working with the incident commander to do this. They're going to be looking at that regional situation status by paying attention to any resources they can, news, radio, TV, etc. And they're going to be thinking about that long term, what's going to need to happen in 12 or 24 hours, the long-term planning component. Do we have changes in weather occurring, etc. And they can also debrief teams as they come back, so that the planning section chief can have as much information available as to what's happening with the teams, so they can debrief the teams as they come back. And then this information is all being gathered together for continued planning and second phase actions, which we'll talk more about. Logistics section, they're setting up the radio communications so that we can communicate with the county, with the town emergency operations centers, and with other CERT team members and other CERT branches. They're gathering all the tools and materials that the operational teams need. And they're setting up runners or gophers as required to support everybody's operations. And if we need other resources, then they're locating and gathering those external resources. Like if we need a pickup truck to transport people, things like that. So let's say that we've now gotten 24 hours into this incident. Things are starting to change. We have a fewer number of rapidly developing situations. A percentage of our neighbors' homes are damaged and they're not able to use them or unwilling to enter the homes, and so a lot of people are camping out. Utilities are cut off, probably have some blocked roadways. Maybe we have bad weather, rain in the forecast. And some people in the medical operations treatment area are getting worse. So we need to continue to care for the injured. We want to move as many people as possible to more advanced care if we're able to do that. And we need to set up shelter for those that are unable to get home. Think about food and water distribution. Think about aftershocks. What could happen aftershocks could affect our operations. We can assist with passing health and welfare messages, so people are looking for loved ones, or we can help in that process. And CERT team members are trained in basic psychological support, so we can provide some support in that sense as well. There's one position I haven't mentioned yet, and that's the Eoc Liaison. Now, here in our program, as you know, we have 3 branches. 2 of those branches are Woodside and Portola Valley, and the Woodside and Portola Valley Emergency Operations Centers will be active in a major incident. And the role of the Eoc Liaison is to coordinate the communications between that branch, command post, and the respective town's Emergency Operations Center. So, for example, if this was the Woodside branch, then we would have a Woodside Town Eoc Liaison. Now, this liaison is a certain member who is either physically located at the town's EOC and is coordinating communications between the CERT branch command and the town EOC, or if that's not possible, then we do this communications over our radio system. This is very important because, as we know, the towns will be having their emergency operations centers activated in a major incident. When exactly that happens after the incident is going to vary based upon the severity and the time that this occurs. For example, in our scenario here, we're talking about a Saturday noon major earthquake. Well, obviously the towns don't operate and have staff in the office on Saturday afternoons, so there's going to be a time delay between when the EOCs become active. we've set up our communications and organizational structure so that immediately after a major incident, our command post can communicate directly to the county area EOC, which will allow us to pass critical messages. But once the town EOCs are operational, we do want to have a liaison with the EOCs so that we can pass on important information such as the incidents that we're working on, provide damage assessment. We can request resources. So if we need resources, we can put those requests into the town EOCs and see if they can provide us those resources. So this is a role that the branch incident commander can establish and should be established in a major incident as soon as the town EOCs are operational. We should talk about demobilization, or basically just the time in which we're going to be shutting operations down. We obviously can't just walk away and leave everything as is. We have to orderly make sure everything is put away and documented. So the first thing we're going to do is make sure that we've been in contact with our other WPV-CERT branches. So if I'm the Woodside branch, I want to make sure that I've checked in with Portola Valley branch and with Skyline branch, make sure that they don't have any things that we could be helping them with. And if they don't, then we can go ahead and start shutting down. We absolutely need to make sure that all of our personnel are accounted for and checked out. So again, this goes back to personnel accountability. We check them in and then we check them out. So we make sure that all of our personnel are in good shape and checked out. We're going to take all that documentation that everybody's been preparing and we're going to secure it, make sure it's all kept. We're not throwing any of that stuff away. We're keeping everything that's been written down. We're going to put it all in one place and make sure it's in a safe, secure location so that if we need to reference it or if the towns or anyone else needs to look at that, we have it available for them. And then, of course, we've got a lot of CERT equipment that's been used. We've got computers and radios and all sorts of things, trailers. We need to make sure all that equipment has been returned, that it's been inventoried, and it's been secured back in its safe places. So just remember, we do need to be methodical about the demobilization procedure, make sure everything gets wrapped up appropriately. All right, let's wrap up this section on ICS. In summary, delegate. Understand the basic ideas behind the ICS organizational structure and some of the important parts of ICS, such as span of control and unity of command. You don't need to worry about all the specific details, but just understand the basic concepts behind it. Remember to always maintain accountability with check-in and check-out procedures for all of our CERT members and volunteers. You can always reference your field operating guide as needed, so always make sure you have that available. It's perfectly okay if you don't remember all the specifics of this stuff, as long as you remember where to find it. So just remember it's all in the fog. You should also read and understand our program standard operating procedures, or SOP. They're available on our website. There is some appendices to the SOPs, which include position descriptions of these positions that we've talked about here this afternoon. And of course, be sure to participate in our upcoming drills and exercises so you can practice these skills. Hopefully with COVID, we'll be able to get some of this stuff scheduled later towards the end of the year, and then we can actually get back to practicing it. And finally, documentation is critical. If you didn't write it down, it didn't happen, so always keep pens and paper available so you can take notes. All right, so any questions so far? Robert, I see your hand is up if you want to go ahead and unmute.
Hi again, sorry, I don't want to monopolize the question session, but I have a question about that period between, you're at home and something happens on Saturday afternoon, like the earthquake, and you're checking in. Because I know it's important to check in and be accountable and then be delegatable and so forth. But if, how much work do you do on the way to there? If there is a downed power line that's dangerous to other people that might be running, away from their burning house or something, Do you stay there? Do you mark the site, or do you just go to the town center and report it, and hopefully nobody goes over that in the meantime? Same with accidents or hurt animals, or whatever occurs on the way to before you check in.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's going to be hard to give you a hard and fast answer to that, but the way I would approach it is that, in your CERT backpack, you should have a roll of caution tape, and if you're on your way down to the staging area and you see something like a down power line, then I would stop, put up the caution tape, I'd write it down in my damage assessment, and then I'd continue to head on my way to staging and give that damage assessment to the command post. And then now they know, okay, there's a down power line, we need to report that. We could go through, a scenario, a whole bunch of different scenarios of when you would or wouldn't stop. But I think the key thing to think about, and this goes back to the concept of resource management, is that you may be stopping for, an animal that's lost when your skill could be used in a much greater fashion because someone else, needs to be, somebody needs assistance medically, or, fire needs to be put out, or you need to do search and rescue. So that's the whole concept behind the resource staging, is that you are supposed to go and check in and be assigned and not just kind of self-activate yourself on an incident.
Understood.
And there's some, when you take the IS-100, the FEMA course, there's some examples of this. One of the examples they give is, they say, there's some big medical issue, and, Sally is a emergency medical technician. And should she stop and render aid, or should she report in and get an assignment? And the answer is you're supposed to stop and you're supposed to check in and get an assignment rather than just randomly stop and start providing assistance. Again, it goes back to that resource prioritization. You're one element in the whole organization, and that organization as a whole knows where your resources are more or better to be allocated.
In the Q&A, Carol asked a similar question, which is taking it to the extreme of would you stop on the way to command post if someone was bleeding to death to stop the bleeding?
Yeah, so I would say yes.
And I would actually add that this is a case of you definitely want to help when there's something that is life-threatening. Also be aware that because of your training, you might be able to get others to provide assistance as well.
Yeah, that's a great response, Cam. If there's other people available that can, hold pressure on a wound, things like that, then you can seek assistance from others in that sense.
But this really does highlight the general idea that there is no fixed right answer. And that a lot of what we're doing with the incident command system, with the CERT training, is trying to maintain these higher level goals and by being organized as a team. And so that idea of you will have to make a judgment call in terms of resources, but you need to keep in mind that it's not just what's happening right in front of you. So you have to put it in that context.
Yeah, and Patrick asked a question. Do you prioritize damage assessment over initial response, or is it all in one? Team discovers an incident and gets locked into it until they resolve it. So damage assessment that we've been talking about so far is referring to CERT team members essentially just making notes about what they find on their way to staging. So in that example, of the power line down, you might stop for 5 seconds to put some caution tape around it. And then you write that down on your damage assessment, and then you go check in. So we don't prioritize damage assessment in that sense. The key is to just be the kind of eyes and ears for the CERT team as these folks are coming to the staging location. The prioritization of incidents is what is so critical that occurs in the command post, and dispatching of teams to the highest priority incidents. And this is again is something that the command post is having to think about, and that's that you know, if a team is working on a particular incident and a higher priority incident occurs, there's absolutely no reason that the command post can't reassign that team. So if a team is currently, you know, doing evacuation notifications and suddenly there's a search and rescue incident that requires more resources, then that team can get redispatched. It's completely up to the command post to prioritize these incidents. Question regarding, so no dedicated damage assessment team. So this is a second part of damage assessment, and I think it's kind of a mistake of the way that the CERT program labels the form. They call it a damage assessment form, and the main purpose of it is for CERT members to fill it out on their way to staging. There's another key part of damage assessment, and that's going out and taking a systematic view of neighborhoods and checking them for their status so that we can update the town EOCs so that they can then requisition resources that may be needed. And that's another very important and critical component of what we can do as CERT teams. And I think that might be your question, Patrick, is damage assessment, where you actually send out teams to go do damage assessment, is one of the roles that the CERT command posts need to focus on. And the more quickly we can get a view of the status of our town or area, the quicker that we can get that to the EOCs, and the more quickly the EOCs can request the resources from the county or the state or federal. So that's the purpose of that level of damage assessment. And that's another topic that we're going to cover. We'll probably do a whole webinar on damage assessment. We use something called a rapid needs assessment, or RNA form. Essentially, it's a list of addresses, and you drive, or you do a windshield survey where you drive by the houses and you make a note as to, you know, the status, is it damaged, etc. So yeah, damage assessment, that's a great topic. We will have another whole webinar on damage assessment, rapid needs assessment.
Mark, there's also 2 questions in the Q&A right now. Steve asks, there are a number of CERT standard forms that can be useful. Are we going to be reviewing those?
Steve, that's a great question. That is coming up in the next couple slides. I will say that the forms that are the standard CERT forms are fairly generic. And we actually just had a little conversation about this. Within the ICS Incident Command System world, there are standardized forms. They all have numbers. So like an ICS 214 or an ICS 201. And these are the forms that are used in, you know, professional response activities. So the CERT program, when it was written, somebody thought it would be a good idea to kind of make a separate set of forms that were a little bit more simplified. I personally don't think that was a good idea, because when CERT teams are interacting with professional responders, then you know, there's some disconnect. So I think we'll be working on that, but for now, the CERT forms are the ones that are in the participant manual. They're on our website, and we will cover some of them in the next couple slides. Jerry asks the question, does planning or operations actually form the teams? How does that handoff work? So planning's job is to prioritize incidents and figure out where operations needs to assign the teams. Operations' job is to actually form the teams, give them their assignment, and track them. So yeah, planning is looking at the board saying, okay, I got 10 incidents, I've got 20 people. What am I going to tell operations to do? So I'm going to say, operations, I need you to go work on this incident and this incident and this incident. And then operations' job is to write down that assignment, give it to them, and then track the people that are involved in that incident. So again, planning is the thinking component. You can think of them as the ones sitting at the desk with, you know, all the paper and the pens, and they're thinking, oh gosh, you know, we got all this stuff going on. What am I going to tell my ops chief we need to get done? And then the ops chief's job is to get it done. Bill Springer asks, spontaneous volunteers. We do have one quick slide on spontaneous volunteers, and I'm happy to answer more questions after that if we don't answer that. But yes, there's a slide on spontaneous volunteers coming up. I think we should take, just for everybody's benefit, I think it's 4:09. We have this scheduled until 5 o'clock, and we're doing pretty well on time. I'm gonna take a 3-minute break, just if anybody wants to grab a glass of water or something, and I'll be back in 3 minutes, okay? Feel free to put any questions. I'll answer them when we get back in 3 minutes. Okay, that was probably a little more than 3 minutes, but I will get started. Let's talk about spontaneous volunteers. So these are people that are going to show up at our command post or staging locations just offering to help. And so we need to anticipate this, plan for it, and be able to manage this resource. One of the key things we need to do with all volunteers is they need to fill out a registration form with a release of liability. And then we need to assign them to useful but safe roles where we can ensure safety, such as staffing a registration table, being a scribe, handing out water and supplies, low risk things like this. Never assign tasks to individuals who are not qualified, or if skills and qualifications are not readily able to be verified. So for example, we could have somebody that wants to check in as a CERT member, but if we have no way of verifying that, let's say that they say, yeah, I took CERT training 10 years ago, but I don't have any evidence of that. And we go and we look up in our database of people that went through our CERT program and we can't find them in there, then we have to assume that they haven't taken the training because we haven't been able to verify that credential. So in that case, we would need to assign them to non-CERT level roles. So just expect spontaneous volunteers and anticipate for it, make sure that we can manage that resource effectively. Let's change gears and talk about documentation. We've mentioned quite a few times that we need to maintain adequate documentation. That helps us to maintain accountability of our personnel and make sure that everything that we do is documented in a way. So let's say if somebody shows up at the command post and says, I'm looking for my daughter, I know that she's a CERT member and I need to find her. We can go and look at the documentation and say, okay, well, she was assigned to the medical triage team, so you can find her down there at medical triage. So maintaining appropriate documentation is critical. First and foremost, we should always just have basic pens and paper available. We have customized forms for various purposes, but in the absence of those forms, you can always just use a regular sheet of paper. So always good to have a notebook full of paper available for you in your CERT backpack. There's some standard forms that you learned about in your CERT training. These are listed here. I'm not going to go into the details of all of these, but you can find them on our website under Resources Forms, Learn Resources Forms. They're also in the CERT Participant Manual. They show examples of these, but just be aware that these forms do exist. Be a good idea to look at them and just understand the basic purposes of them. Also on our website, we have a document which explains the use of the form and who would be using it. I'd recommend you take a look at that. So let's just go over some basic documentation flows here, how these different forms can be used. So in the command post, we have either our incident commander, team leader, or our operations section chief who's going to be putting together teams and assigning them tasks. He or she's going to use an incident assignment tracking log. This is going to list who's on the team, what their assignment is, so that we can go back and look and see who's doing what at any given time. It's a very important form to use. As CERT volunteers arrive, they're going to be filling out damage assessments on their way into the staging location. So if they notice blocked roads or fires or medical emergencies, they're going to be writing that down on this damage assessment form. It could just be a regular piece of paper. When they arrive, they're going to be checking in. So they're going to be signing in to our personnel resources sign-in sheet, if we have one, or just a blank piece of paper for sign-in if that's what we have available. And then as our command post team is assigning incidents and forming teams, they're going to be filling out an incident briefing, and that's going to be given to the team that is going to list what their tasks are, so they know exactly what they're supposed to be doing and who's on their team. In the medical treatment areas, we're going to have a victim treatment area record. This is a form used to track the status of patients in the treatment area. And then we have a communications log. This is used to record all incoming and outgoing radio communications. This would typically be kept by a scribe who would be working with the radio operator so that the radio operator can talk on the radio and then someone else can actually log the messages. And then also a equipment inventory. This would be kept by logistics to make sure that equipment is checked in and checked out. So these are just some of the basic forms that we can use. As I mentioned, we can use the forms that we have. We can always use just regular blank pieces of paper. Just try to keep everything written down and documented. Okay, we're going to switch over to Cam, who's going to do medical ops. So I'm going to stop my screen share and Cam's going to start up hers.
Okay, so at this point, what we're going to do is focus in on the medical operations, which is one aspect of the general operations. So within the medical operations, there are a number of different aspects of it. So you've got the triage assessment, you've got treatment, the transportation of folks, the gathering of the deceased at a morgue, and supplies taking place. So as many of you have already been trained, there is a process by doing a quick assessment and sorting a large number of victims so that we have a consistent way of identifying what level of treatment is required at this point in time. One thing to be aware of is that the triage is going to take place, it could take place either at the scene of an incident that then would require transport to the treatment center, or it could be as people are coming to the treatment center directly. And I'm just going to do a quick review of triage levels. There is going to be a separate unit available that is going to be through the California State website, going into just a chance to practice triage. But the big idea is that you want to distinguish between those folks who are minimally injured, those who are injured but do not require immediate treatment, those who need treatment immediately and have a life-threatening situation, and those who are deceased. There are many different ways, and you'll see many different forms of the triage flowchart. This is one that we've got printed out on just a little handheld page, and I think gives you a basic idea that the very first thing you want to do is you call out and say, if you can hear my voice, come, and then you give them a specific location to go to. As a general rule, if someone can walk, they are a minor, not a minor person, but I mean a minor injury level. And so you want to move those to a side. You'll hear the description for start triage of 32 can do. And basically, if someone is breathing more than 30 times a minute, that is a sign of significant shock. For a child, it's more like 45. If their perfusion, when you pinch their fingernail and it blanches and then you release it, if it takes more than 2 seconds to reperfuse, that's a sign that they have very poor perfusion. Or if you ask them a simple command, like, can you squeeze my hand? If any of these situations are true, then they are considered an immediate. If none of those things are true, they may be hurt, but it's not something that is going to necessarily be life-threatening and immediate. This is not a treatment phase. This is a categorization phase. Once you have a sense of, at a specific site, that you've got a certain number of people who are red, yellow, green, for those who need immediate treatment, for those who need delayed treatment, most likely you will be transporting them to the treatment center. Now, of course, there will be times that there will be some treatment that for immediate life-threatening situations that will take place at that specific location, but many of them it will be a question of moving them to the treatment center. And that is, again, for following the basic principle of we are wanting to do the greatest good for the greatest number of people. When we do the exercises, we'll get a chance to practice some of the various forms of carries that take place and how to build litters so that you can do that transport safely. There are times that you will need to do some splinting so that that transport can take place. But the majority of that treatment will be taking place at the treatment centers. Because there's a lot of details to this, I want to encourage you to go to that link, which is an electronic copy of the Field Operations Guide. We also have in the past handed out a slightly different version of the Field Operations Guide. If you've taken the course already, for those of you who are new, we are going to be moving to this new version, and there is an electronic copy that you can download as well. So when you think about what is it at the treatment site, just like we triage people into different phases, we actually will have different physical locations in proximity to each other, but distinguished from each other, so that we can then do appropriate division of labor. And in the same way that the incident commander is going to be delegating to logistics, operations, planning, in the same way, whoever is the medical team leader, as the scale of it goes up, will probably be delegating to having someone who is responsible for the red immediate care area, someone for the yellow delayed care area, and then having the minor care area separate. Of course, the morgue would be it will be out of sight and separate. When you think about where you're setting these up, just like with the command post, we think about what is an area that is free of hazards and debris, somewhere that if there is if you are in proximity of a hazard, that you are uphill and upwind. And a really significant one is thinking about the transport and where are people going to be driving in, and both in terms of people arriving, but also in terms of for those immediate care that you want to get, if we do have a number of ambulances available, when they do become available, you want to make it so that it's very easy for them to get access to the site. So that layout is really significant. As I mentioned, the immediate and delayed should be relatively close to each other, in part because there will be re-triaging. There will be people who change statuses from one to the other. And so you have that treatment area. You want it to be very visually accessible. I honestly don't know if we currently have it in our supply, but it may be one of the supplies we purchase are those pre-printed large signage that helps you know that which area is immediate, delayed, or minor. If we don't have them, then we create big signage on the fly and help that visual layout. Because some people will be coming to the treatment area directly and will not be being transported, we also will have a triage area at the medical treatment area as well, so that when someone is a walk-up, that we are able to distinguish where should they go for appropriate treatment. Just as a little detail, so this treatment area is where and when we're going to be doing the more advanced we're going to be doing a thorough head to toe on every person there. The triage will give us the big picture of what is life-threatening right now, but it doesn't tell us the whole picture. The medical treatment area is where we want to make sure that we do a solid head to toe so that we discover what is going on. And so that it's kind of like, think of it as a triage on a deeper level. Logistical detail that can be helpful is if you have a mass casualty incident, you've got a large number of victims. If you lay them a few feet apart from each other and basically going back and forth head to toe, you can it actually makes it more efficient, because then you're doing head to toe on one, turn around, and then you do head to toe on the next. So those treatment areas, I said, that's where the head to toe assessment is taking place. It's also where the treatment is taking place, and the very important documentation. The documentation is vital for us to be able to communicate from the medical team leader can communicate effectively to the operations chief. How many red do we have? How many yellow? How many green? That will then drive what kind of resources, and will help the emergency operations center on a town level, on an area level, that they can then distribute their resources appropriately. It helps give that what's called situational awareness. Within the FOG, there is a reminder of how to do the head to toe. We're not going to go into that in great depth right now, but it is something that is a skill that we will practice with our drills. And it is, the fundamental principle is that it is thorough, and so that you really know what's going on. The field operations guide also has a number of information about doing basic treatment. It is not a replacement for a first aid class, but it is something that helps remind us. Thankfully, these are not things that we're experiencing every day. And so it's really valuable to have that booklet as that field operations guide, or if you have taken a first aid class, the booklet that goes with that, to help remind you of some of the key principles. And as I said, documentation is vital. Mark pointed out that within the Learn Resources section, we do have the Cert Forms on our webpage. And right now, we have a very simple, straightforward, we need to know who's here. What are they triaged at? Basic information. And just like we need accountability for our responders, we need to be able to say who was here and where they went. If someone says, if someone comes and it's like, I'm looking for somebody, we need to know this information. Setting up a morgue is an important part of this as well. Having that in a secured location that's out of sight, but secured. And supply, obviously we use medical supplies. We'll be working with logistics, and and it may be that you have assigned runners, and so you've got that, making sure that each area of treatment has the supplies that they need. That's the end of my section, and I'd like to open it up for questions. And Mark, I'm going to actually quit my sharing so that you can pick it back up. So I see one question of how do you secure a morgue? And a lot of that is a matter of visibility and a matter of staffing. You also will be working with, if we do have access to resources through the cities, that we may be working with them. But that's something that the team commanding, the incident command team will have to work on. Another question came up of how do you deal with people that don't speak English? And that's a really good question and a great use of, with planning, knowing what language sets exist within your volunteer base is one resource. If you don't, and that includes your spontaneous volunteers as spontaneous translators. You can also use, there are some resources. There's an application called Metababble, which actually has some canned medically oriented questions that are tools that if some, and when you take a medical class, you may get some more exposure to those, but there are some resources. There's also a heck of a lot that can be done just in terms of gesturing, doing the best you can with sign language, and in just doing the best that you can. Okay. Do triage and head-to-toe assessments stay with the victim versus the medical ops team? So that's a really good question. In terms of you want to have some information go with the patient so that there is a continuity of care, and you also have some information that stays a log that stays with each group. At this point in time, I don't know the exact forms that we would use for that, but the concept is that you want to have that continuity. The medical oriented information needs to be with the patient, but you have to have a log of the overall picture. Donnie asks the question of the county coroner said that only they and their agents are allowed to move a body. How does that apply in an emergency? And I actually don't know the answer to that. My assumption, and if Mark or anyone else on the team knows another answer, that we would not be bringing anyone to the treatment center who is deceased, but anyone who dies on scene, we would then put in the morgue. And please correct me if there is an extension to that information.
That's how I would answer it, Cam, but I'm no expert either. So, but that's how I would answer it.
Are there any other questions with regards to medical operations?
Looks like Elena has a question. I'll go ahead and unmute you there. Elena, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, yeah, just a question about how you determine that somebody has passed away. Who is allowed to do that? And I remember kind of as an EMT, that has to be, certain that somebody's passed away before you can put them into a morgue. Who makes that determination?
That's a good question. And I don't actually have an official answer to it. Within our team, we do have a number of physicians. And so I would, if we had a physician on site, I would probably turn to them to make official declaration of death. But there will be times that for our purposes, if someone is not breathing, if they have no pulse, we are not, in a mass casualty incident, we are not going to be engaging in extreme life-saving measures. And so if it is clear, or if there are what are referred to from an EMT world of the clear signs of death.
Right, right. Although, do you follow they're not dead unless they're warm and dead?
In a disaster situation, I don't think so.
Don't play that game. Okay. All right, thank you.
Yeah, and Carol brought up a good point. A CERT morgue is not any type of official morgue. It's a place to put what we believe is a dead body, and it's up to the coroner and others to make the official calls on there. But we're just having to do our best in an MCI situation. Okay, so it's 4:38. We've got 20 minutes. We're happy to stay here and answer any additional questions that anybody has. If anybody had any questions about the documentation or the spontaneous volunteers or any of the other sections there that we didn't stop on, please feel free, or any questions for Cam for med stuff. We also have Selena here, I think. So if you have any questions for her, she might still be around. So we'll stick out here for a little bit. Feel free to think about it and post it in the chat or raise your hand. Donnie, go for it, Donnie.
Hi, so I have a question, which is that it seems logically that planning would be set up before ops, but all the discussion always puts ops first. But until planning is set up, ops doesn't know what to do.
That's actually a really good point. And I think what's kind of silly is that in the document, a lot of the CERT documentation, it always says that ops is the first position to be assigned. And I'm not going to claim to be any expert on this, but having spoken to people that are experts, you're right. Ops is planning is more likely to be important initially. Now, remember that within the ICS world, we only assign positions as needed. So, the incident commander is responsible for all activities until delegated otherwise. So the incident commander in that initial period is going to be handling the dispatching of teams. So they're functioning as operations. You assign operations when that task becomes larger and the incident commander needs to focus on other activities. So yeah, that's absolutely a great question. I think it's important to realize that what we talked about in this example is a very large scale incident where we have a large number of resources. And so after an hour or so, we can start building out a much bigger organizational structure. But in those initial moments, as we start to build the team, I agree. I think that probably the first person I'd appoint would be a planning chief, and I make sure that the planning chief set up a staging manager to check people in, and then I would start dispatching out teams based upon the initial needs, and as things got bigger and busier, then I would think about establishing an ops section chief. Elena, your hand's still up. Did you happen to have a?
Nope, I'm good. I don't know how to put there we go. Sorry.
No worries.
I think that Carol asks a really important question for us, which is any advice how to handle dual roles if you are a division leader? And if you have no CERT team members show up and you need to be a division leader, how to handle that?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you there, Cam. Could you repeat that one?
My apologies. Carol asks the question, any advice on how to handle dual roles when you are a division leader?
I'm gonna throw that to Chip because Chip's in charge of our Ready program, and so division leaders are part of the Ready program. So Chip, if you want to.
You bet. Yeah. Well, in general, during an emergency for anybody, it's always you're looking for the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And if you're a division leader or a neighborhood leader and you believe that the best place for you to be is there in that role, then of course that's what you need to do as a volunteer. All participation in any role, whether you're working with CERT or the Ready leadership or Red Cross or what have you, it's always voluntary. And so, you need to take a look at what's going on around you, what your skill set is, and where you can do the most good for the greatest number of people. We have in groups.io, we have a discussion area where I think that would be a great place to post that question too, and have some discussion over there for the rest of the people involved in the Ready side.
And if I could throw in there, it's also one of the reasons why it is useful if all of us consider ourselves recruiting officers for the CERT team and for our divisions, because the more people who are trained and ready, the better position we're going to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I encourage everybody, even on the ready side, which is mostly about preparedness, learn all the skills you can, learn all the response skills you can, get all the first aid and Red Cross training. You know, they have training on how to work in a shelter. All of these things might be useful. Anything that interests you, most of the courses are free or very inexpensive. Any skill that you have could save a life. So I encourage everybody to have all the skills they have time and interest to take on.
So Jerry brings up the question about integrating physicians into medical treatment area. This is a multi-point answer to this. First and foremost, we always have to remember that the scope of CERT medical treatment is somewhat limited. So it's what we teach in the CERT training, it's basic first aid, it's triage and basic treatment. Now that being said, if a physician shows up on scene and they're CERT trained, then they would be a perfect candidate to be in a position of being, you know, the medical team leader or in some other leadership role, because they have a greater overall medical capability. But as soon as somebody steps out of the scope of the CERT program, then they need to take off their CERT jacket and no longer be part of the CERT program. And then they become somebody else. They become an individual who may be a physician, who may be a licensed qualified physician, and the CERT program can take advice from them. But if the physician is making judgment calls and things like that, then they're going to potentially be doing that under their own liability. So it's a tricky answer, Jerry. I know that we've talked about this a lot, but I think it's important to realize that within the medical portion of CERT operations, it has to stay within what we train in CERT. And if somebody with additional skills and qualifications, EMTs, nurses, physicians, are part of that team, that they realize that they're doing so as part of, under their own risks and their own liability. And so we wouldn't, so it's a tricky answer, Jerry. I know it's, of course, in a large, you know, mass casualty incident or large scale earthquake, people are going to be doing everything they can to assist. I don't know if Cam wants to add anything to that one, or Selena, but.
I think that you covered the basic complexity of it, that we definitely want to make use of the resources that we have from an information perspective and from a management perspective. But we need to make sure that anyone who is volunteering at a higher medical level is aware that they are not, that their liability is only up to the level that we can do as CERT members.
Let me just add to that's something that, you know, as you gain skills, you need to really be aware of as you move along. If you've got any sort of advanced first aid training, if you've taken first responder training and so forth, and you are working as a CERT, you can't use that. You can't use the extra training. You have to basically take off your CERT identification and say, now I'm treating you as an EMT, or I'm treating you under whatever applies. Of course, we want you to use the best skills you have, but you just kind of have to be aware. And it becomes a natural thing as you gain the skills and you think about things, just to be aware of that, is what hat you're wearing as you apply certain skills. But as you work as a CERT, you need to be sure that you're only applying CERT skills.
Carol asks, how often will this webinar be given? Any ideas? Well, it will certainly obviously be online, so people can watch it. And, you know, this is a program that's being developed, and we have quite a few things we need to work on. As I mentioned, we're not particularly happy with the standard CERT forms. I think it would be much better if they were more aligned with the standard ICS forms. So that's one thing that we definitely need to put together, do a webinar on that. Overall documentation flow is something that we need to do a little bit more presentation on. So, you know, I hope that we can do at least this once a year. It does take quite a bit of time to put together. And as our program expands and grows, we can add components to it so that people can get more information about the specifics.
In the chat, Patrick notes that there are very few things that EMT can do that basic first aid and CERT doesn't teach with regards to the emergency context that we're talking about. And that is absolutely true. That the things, when we talk about protecting airways, when we talk about stopping bleeding, when we talk about preventing shock, that those things that we teach in the CERT class are the same things that people with higher level of treatment will be doing. And what you're doing all the time is you are buying that person more time. Looks like, Lena, you have your hand raised. Go ahead and...
yeah, can you hear me? Does CERT carry oxygen?
No, that is above, that is outside of the CERT skill set.
Okay.
Patrick asks a question regarding, you know, where does staging fall under ops or not planning or not logistics? So, you know, it's interesting because I've actually discussed this with several professionals that work in different professions such as search and rescue, fire, whatnot. And I think that what's interesting about ICS is it's a framework, and some people use it in different ways. You know, they adapt it to their needs. And so the reason in the presentation, I particularly put staging into the planning role instead of either logistics or ops is because it's more likely in our scenario that we'll have somebody assigned to planning first. And therefore, because that's a task we need done first, that's why I'm putting it under planning's role. Now, here in our area, Bay Area Mountain Rescue Group, which is a division of the SMC Sheriff's Office that does professional search and rescue for the Sheriff's Office, they use that method. It just depends on what positions you're staffing. And so it's okay to, you know, think about the fact that we don't have this huge organizational structure defined all the time. So we need to just kind of slot positions under what is most likely to be assigned initially. So in this case, because planning is most likely to be assigned initially, we need a staging manager or we need staging, then that's why we're putting it specifically under planning in this case. Okay, well, I really appreciate everybody's time. Great to have so many attendees today. And I just want to remind everybody that SMC alert is a really important thing to be signed up for. So if you're not, go to smcalert.info. This is where evacuation information gets pushed out, where all critical messaging gets pushed out. The sheriff's office can send messaging, the towns, the fire district, everybody's, this is the primary tool. Make sure that you're, bless you, make sure that you're signed up for SMC Alert. So we got 7 more minutes. I'll stick around if anybody thinks of any questions, but thank you very much, Cam, Chip, Selena, and everybody else for being part of this webinar, and we hope to see you guys again very soon.